Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Yesterday, we talked about China showering South Korean President Lee Jae Myung with ceremony, history, and soft power. Today, we're seeing the other side of that relationship, and it's happening in the Yellow Sea. China is pressing South Korea with what it insists are civilian aquaculture platforms, Shenlan 1 and Shenlan 2. But the update here is that Seoul is now openly signaling concern at the presidential level. These massive steel installations sit in disputed waters that both countries agreed to jointly manage years ago. They're supported by a converted oil rig with housing and a helipad, plus a growing constellation of Chinese research buoys that have been quietly appearing since 2018. What's new is the context. This isn't just a technical fisheries dispute anymore. The Yellow Sea is a strategic funnel. China's northern fleet is based there. Incheon, South Korea's major port, sits across the water. Camp Humphreys, the largest U.S. overseas base, is barely 15 kilometers inland. China has layered in carrier exercises, no-sail zones, and Coast Guard shadowing of South Korean vessels. Lee raised this directly with Xi during his visit, and Beijing promised to move one structure. That promise is now the test. If it doesn't happen, the charm offensive from yesterday starts to look a lot more transactional. Zooming out, this fits with a broader theme we're tracking. China pairing calm rhetoric with persistent pressure while the U.S. is visibly busy elsewhere. Yesterday, we talked about Washington's unpredictability. Today, we're seeing how Beijing is exploiting it. After the U.S. seized Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro and ramped up threats toward Iran over mass protests, China moved fast to position itself as the voice of restraint. Publicly, it's all about opposing force and calling for dialogue. Privately, Beijing is recalculating exposure. China backed Maduro for years and buys most of Iran's exported oil, but it's not stepping in front of American power. It's letting the lesson speak for itself. When the U.S. decides to act, partners are on their own. And speaking of American power, it's still very real, but it's being pulled in multiple directions at once. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was just operating in the South China Sea, running live-fire drills near some of the most contested waters on the planet. Now it's reportedly heading toward the Middle East to reinforce U.S. posture as Iran tensions stay hot. This is the update from yesterday's discussion about U.S. bandwidth. Beijing doesn't need to challenge the carrier directly. It just needs to note that one less carrier in the Indo-Pacific changes the local equation, even temporarily. Taiwan remains the center of gravity for all of this, and today's update is about how tangible China's preparations have become. We've talked before about rhetoric and exercises. Now we're seeing hardware and systems move into place. China is upgrading its J-20 stealth fighters with improved radar, engines, and artificial intelligence designed to help pilots manage complex, beyond visual range fights. The messaging from Chinese analysts is blunt. This is about networked warfare, not hero pilots. The J-20 is meant to operate alongside stealth drones, electronic warfare aircraft, airborne early warning systems, and long-range missile forces. And here's the key update from earlier conversations. China isn't just planning how to fight, it's planning how to sustain a fight. New Shuiqiao-class landing barges were tracked moving into the South China Sea for trials this week. These are mobile, jack-up platforms with deployable roadways that can turn shallow water into functional ports. One was even observed sitting directly on a beach. This is logistics, not theater. It's the kind of capability you build when you're thinking seriously about moving heavy equipment, vehicles, and supplies across contested littorals and keeping them there. On the economic front, the tech war we discussed yesterday is getting sharper edges. The U.S. and Taiwan finalized a trade deal that lowers tariffs in exchange for massive Taiwanese investment in U.S.-based semiconductor and AI production. Hundreds of billions of dollars are on the table, with the explicit goal of pulling a large chunk of Taiwan's chip supply chain onto American soil. From Washington's perspective, this is national security. From Beijing's perspective, it's a slow erosion of leverage over time. Chinese AI leaders are now saying the quiet part out loud. Advanced U.S. chips remain out of reach, and while Chinese firms have gotten clever with efficiency and open-source models, the compute gap is widening. Some companies are renting computing power overseas just to stay competitive. This is an update on yesterday's chip discussion. Export controls aren't just policy anymore, they're shaping corporate strategy in real time. Diplomatically, China is continuing to work the seams among U.S. allies, and Canada is the clearest example today. Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Beijing, the first Canadian leader to visit since 2017, and this trip is about insurance. Ottawa's relationship with Washington has soured fast under tariff threats and stalled trade talks. Carney arrived with ministers covering industry, agriculture, and energy, and the focus is tariffs, especially China's crushing levy on Canadian canola and Canada's own tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Nothing is finalized yet, but the direction is clear. Canada wants diversification. Beijing understands that leverage very well. Public opinion trends inside NATO are also tilting in ways China is watching closely. New polling shows approval of U.S. leadership dropping sharply across the alliance, while views of China improve in several countries. This doesn't mean NATO is breaking, but it does mean Beijing sees room to maneuver, especially when Washington is openly questioning alliances and threatening trade partners. China's global footprint keeps expanding in quieter ways, too. In Myanmar, authorities credited Chinese intelligence sharing for the seizure of massive jungle drug labs capable of producing hundreds of millions of methamphetamine tablets. In Brazil, a Chinese naval hospital ship docked in Rio under a humanitarian banner, even as Brazilian officials privately expressed discomfort over the lack of transparency. It's soft power, but with antennas, sensors, and very controlled access. And finally, China is tightening the screws on law enforcement and control beyond its borders. Thai police officers were dismissed and charged for taking bribes to illegally release Chinese fugitives from detention. At the same time, Beijing issued public calls for suspects tied to a major cross-border gambling and fraud syndicate to surrender or face international manhunts. This is China projecting authority outward, quietly reinforcing the idea that it can reach you, even if you're not on the mainland. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow.